Go ahead, sir, when you're ready.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I thank you for the opportunity to appear before you. My name is Phil Kline. I am the director of the Amistad Project for the Thomas More Society out of Chicago, which has been concerned about election integrity for 2 years now. And additionally, I'm former Attorney General of Kansas, a former state legislator, and a former district attorney, and currently serving as assistant professor of law at Liberty University School of Law. And I appreciate your time and interest in this proceeding. From where we sit, we witnessed an unprecedented and coordinated infusion of private funds, as well as a private-public partnership in all swing states to improperly and unlawfully impact the result of the 2020 presidential election. And I will provide you some additional information regarding that during this testimony. But first, I'd like to address what I have witnessed during the testimony, which is consistent with the concerns that have arisen as we've watched this election, and that is the deconstruction of truth through the deconstruction of the definition and meaning of words, such that the result is lawlessness, and the mandates of this legislature are not respected nor followed through that deconstruction of words. I witnessed in, and you'll have to forgive me, I forget the new name, but in Michigan, in the Cobo Center, in the Consolidated Counting Center, the exclusion of one party from being able to witness the counting of the ballots, the handling of the ballots, and the curing of ballots, with the justification that although Michigan law requires that representatives of both political party be present at the place of the counting, that the Republican who was placed in the cheap seats in a hall that is over 2 football fields long and could not see what is actually occurring with the handling of the ballots, complied with the law because he was in the place. To which I say, Detroit is a place. The planet Earth is a place. Clearly, the purpose of the law was to prevent fraud through a prophylactic measure of allowing both political parties to witness the management, the handling, and the counting of ballots. In fact, the United States Agency for International Development states that it monitors foreign elections for transparency, so that all of those who have a political interest may witness the handling, the counting, and the management and receipt of ballots. America, the United States, did not have a transparent election in any form and in any manner in every location that funds from Mr. Zuckerberg touched. And in fact, the plans that were initiated through his funds that were mandated by a charity to which he gave $350 million required that these elections be managed in that fashion. We can't privatize elections. Elections are a core government function, and government should not put its thumb on the scale to dictate who may turn out to vote more easily while suppressing the vote of other demographics throughout the nation. And that is exactly what happened this time. Here I saw the testimony of Mr. Knudsen, who told you that he could not determine what the statute meant that a voter delivering an absentee ballot must deliver it to the clerk, that it was too vague, that perhaps it was somebody other than the voter, or perhaps it was even delivering the vote to an object, like a drop box, rather than a person. Well, clearly the words of the statute and the purpose of the statute indicate that the vote should be delivered to a human being in order to be able to validate the legitimacy of the vote. I find it I'm incredulous with the argument that that statute can mean you could deliver a ballot to an object and it would verify its authenticity. The deconstruction of words has resulted in lawlessness in this election. I've had the occasion to visit the National Archives. I've had the honor, as perhaps many of you have had, in viewing our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, which is kept in a vault, because it is so fragile that if it is exposed to oxygen, it will turn to dust. It cannot stop a bullet. It cannot protect the American people. It cannot ensure that our elections are transparent, inclusive, and accurate unless the words in that document resonate in the heart of a people. And when we destroy the meaning of words, we destroy the precious protections that we have in our Constitution and in law. One of those most precious protections is equality before the law. The Amistad Project got involved when it started to see the perpetual use of emergency police powers for certain executives to use those police powers to no longer declare themselves as part of the lawmaking process, but to say they are the law. What they get up in the morning and decide is the law. And they lost faith, apparently, in the democratic process. Because you representatives and senators are not in a bunker, you're not incapacitated, you can operate and function, and our Constitution mandates a separation of powers to protect the individual liberties of each and every citizen. And when those powers are breached, and one person claims that they can determine what the law is, all persons suffer. And if you look across our nation right now, these laws which control every aspect of human behavior, whether you can visit a loved one in the hospital, whether you have to be 6 feet or 5 feet 11 inches away from another human being, whether your mask covers your nose and your mouth, are unenforceable because no police force is large enough to do so. And so they're being enforced against those who raise their voice against these actions, and that is arbitrary and capricious application of law. This started to occur in the election process. First in March of 2020, with a launch of litigation primarily initiated by organizations tied to the left to eviscerate protections of the absentee ballot and its integrity. They attacked witness requirements. They attacked even delivering the election or the ballot to the clerk. They claimed that drop boxes were mandated by the Constitution. And soon afterwards, in March of 2020, a man by the name of David Plouffe published a book called The Citizen's Guide for Defeating Donald Trump. That guide, by the way, and David Plouffe was the former campaign manager of President Obama. At the time, he was working for Mark Zuckerberg and his wife, Priscilla Chan. And in that book, he said that this election will be determined by a block-by-block street fight to turn out the vote in Detroit, Milwaukee, and Philadelphia. Soon afterwards, and I'd ask if we can put the chart on the, this is my daughter Jacqueline. I'm here on behalf of Got Freedom, which is a C4 that she runs. So thank you for paying for this trip, Jacqueline. I appreciate it. And here's a chart. And Mr. Chairman, we will be pleased to supplement this. By the way, this is evidence. This is evidence. I think there's a misunderstanding of evidence. If I have a subpoena, and I oversaw the Kansas Bureau of Investigation for a while, to subpoena, I'm sorry, Senator Darling, to use you as an example, that I believe that you're evading taxes, and I believe that you have documents at your home, and I have a search warrant, and I show up on a sunny day, 95 degrees, I'm sweltering hot outside, you bar the door, and I see smoke coming from the chimney. That's evidence that the documents are disappearing. So we don't need to necessarily step in there, but it is amazing that those who have the evidence are saying, don't worry, there's no fraud here, rather than revealing the evidence to the American people. Well, this is evidence. We have tracked thus far over $500 million to flow through private organizations from the funders on the top level, including $500 million from Mr. Zuckerberg and his charities alone, that flow into various 501c organizations that have initiated unique contracts with government to obtain sensitive information of citizens, as well as to dictate how your elections are to be run. Now, I have to say that under the United States Constitution and the Electors Clause and the Elections Clause, that responsibility rests with you, not cities, not counties, which are creatures of the state, but with you. In fact, you prepare an election plan every election, and you submit it to the federal government for approval of the receipt of funds under the Help America Vote Act. Under the federal law, you must provide that plan in a way that provides equal protection for all voters. That's the primary concern with fair elections, that every vote have equal weight. And so it requires you to disperse those funds based on a formula of the number of voters within a jurisdiction, so that all voters will be treated equally regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of political affiliation or personal belief. You submit, and it is received and approved, and you received those funds to administer this election. Your cities receiving Mr. Zuckerberg's funds, and I'm going to refer to it that way, because if I gave $350 million to a charity, I have a right to call it after my name. Your cities that receive these funds violated your plan intentionally. Now, I'm not here to speak about criminal law. I'll give some references to that in a minute. I'm speaking about violation of election laws, which was done willfully and intentionally. Laws that are there to protect the integrity of the election. In fact, your statutes specifically speak to this. I'm speaking to Wisconsin Law Section 6.84, subsection 1, that this is provided to prevent the potential for fraud. You recognize that if these laws are not followed, you are unable to determine if fraud occurred. In other words, the potential for fraud is the key standard you must assess in determining under the Constitution whether to certify the election. It's the media that has said you must prove fraud. No law. No law. I have prosecuted fraudsters. And let me tell you, it takes a long time to prove it. And you only convict after you have enough information to get one of them to confess. Because you can't prove a state of mind. Sometimes you can circumstantially. If I had a gun and I pointed it at the chairman and I pulled the trigger and said, oops, I didn't know what a gun did, circumstantially you would determine my intent. And I would be convicted of murder. But this type of fraud, you can't prove the intent unless somebody confesses. That is a false standard for the exercise of your responsibilities. Your responsibilities are thus: was the election lawful? You have ample evidence, and I would say not just evidence, you have admissions by those who operated this election that they did not do it lawfully, consistent with your design, your plan, and your law. The second question is, do you have faith in the result? And if you do not, I would say your legal obligation is not to certify and either send 2 sets of electors or send no electors. And by the way, the Constitution does not mandate December 8th, nor December 14th. Those are congressional statutes. They don't override your plenary power and responsibility under the United States Constitution to get to the bottom of this matter. So, let me give you examples of the flow of Mr. Zuckerberg's money, and then I'm going to back up to some more evidence. And these are through admissions of the Center for Tech and Civic Life that he poured the money into. And there's a flaw here, by the way. A flaw in that they are a private organization, so they're not subject, like you are, to freedom of information requests, to demands for them to open up their books, or any transparency whatsoever. And so the information I am providing you is what we've been able to scratch and claw and obtain. Mr. Zuckerberg's grants. The CTCL started to reach out to Wisconsin as early as April of 2020. By May, they had reached out directly to the mayor of Racine, and they told him, we will give you a $100,000 grant. That at the time, based on previous 990 filings, would be about 10% of their entire annual budget. And they told him, you are to keep 60,000 of these funds. Then you're to reach out to the mayor of Green Bay, the mayor of Kenosha, the mayor of Milwaukee, and I'm forgetting the 5th city right now. I'm getting word of mouth. You guys know about this. And so there were 5. and you're to give them $10,000 so that they can prepare a Wisconsin-safe election plan. In other words, these 5 cities preparing their own Wisconsin state election plan without any coordination, cooperation, or involvement of the rest of Wisconsin. So they started to prepare this plan to receive additional funds from the Center for Tech and Civic Life, which, again, Mark Zuckerberg is not given to, but it's obvious that the pipeline was going to be opened because they were asking people to obtain funds they did not yet have. Through that, your cities prepared this election plan. Within that plan, they established the provision of drop boxes. Now, it's mighty interesting in that the chain of custody of the ballot is one of the prime considerations in any state law or regulation that ensures the protection and accuracy of the vote. You must maintain a chain of custody of the ballot. If you look at every one of your laws, you will see that focus as vitally important in the application of that law. Yet where is your chain of custody on the millions of ballots that were placed in drop boxes? Where is the video? Where are the logs that show who picked them up and where they took them and what time they were picked up and what time they arrived? To act consistent with your laws, they should have had a 2-person per key system, such that Johnny, who may be a young Republican, wouldn't pick up ballots in a Democrat precinct and accidentally lose several on the way to these consolidated counting centers. Or if Billy, who might be an activist with Black Lives Matters, picks up ballots in a predominantly Republican area and might accidentally lose some on the way to the polling places. Where is your chain of custody? It was promised to you. It was mandated. In any of these states where Mr. Zuckerberg's monies arrived, they have not been provided. By Georgia, by Pennsylvania, by Arizona, by Wisconsin, or by Michigan. That raises serious concerns. Drop boxes, as you know, are inconsistent with statute, despite Mr. Knutson's torture of the meaning of the word clerk. The clerk is not an object, clearly. So that is deeply concerning with your election. And as a result, you have an error rate in the treatment of ballots that greatly exceeds the tolerance of the error rate under federal law. Your election system, if looked at in hindsight, would not be certified under federal law because of all of these errors. And I haven't even gotten to the indefinitely confined. Or if you read the Wisconsin Safe Election Plan prepared by these 5 cities, contrary to your direction, contrary to your plan, in violation of the plan accepted by HAVA, you will find that they identify voter ID as a burden, as an obstacle to be overcome. And they did that unlawfully by directing first a member of the Wisconsin Election Committee stating, treat all voters as indefinitely confined because of COVID. It took your Supreme Court in March to tell them that's not the law. And the next thing that occurred is a directive not to question whether people were indefinitely confined. Well, I have to tell you, we did question it. And we reviewed social media of those who were reported as being indefinitely confined. And believe me, they were celebrating Halloween. They were going out and doing things. They were not indefinitely confined. Your indefinitely confined absentee ballots rose. And I'm speaking, if the gentleman were to ask me to swear to it, this is the best of my memory. I'm sorry. I don't have an encyclopedic memory, but you can check it out. From about 70,000, I think, to over 250,000 in this election. 250,000 people who are submitting ballots contrary to your direction that they provide identification on those ballots. Can you have faith in the result when such laws are ignored and such ballots are counted and cast despite the law? And that is also true with the curing of ballots and absentee ballots, the completion on the envelope of information where your law clearly states that ballot is not to be counted, but it was cured. Now, I will ask this of you, if you will indulge me. I'm going to take one example in Pennsylvania, and we are still developing the numbers in Wisconsin. The flow of Mr. Zuckerberg's money. Delaware County, Pennsylvania received substantial dollars. They established with his money one drop box for every 4 square miles, one drop box for every 4,000 voters. That's 2 miles by 2 miles square. That's a place to vote within walking distance of your home. This is all occurring, by the way, with many governors suspending and sidestepping state law regarding the number of in-person polling places required by law, consolidating those places, and reducing opportunities to vote in person. You can look at any polling throughout this election, and you will see that one party prefers to vote in person. One party prefers to vote absentee in advance. I will say this, that government putting its thumb on the scale to increase turnout of one demographic is the opposite side of the same coin as government putting its thumb on the scale to suppress one demographic from voting. It's the same thing. You can't treat persons or groups differently despite identity politics and cancel culture. Our rights are intrinsic, not offered by you. They're to be protected by you. And when government gets in the game through Mr. Zuckerberg's funds of treating groups of people differently, it violates a basic tenet of American law that we all should hold fast to as a protection of individual liberty. So in Delaware County, one drop box for every 4 square miles. In the 59 counties the President Trump won, one drop box for every 1,159 square miles. So in Pennsylvania, the state said, if you're in a Democrat area, we'll come pick up your ballot or walk to the corner. In the counties that Trump won, go on a weekend vacation and find Waldo. It's similar here in Wisconsin because of the infusion of these funds. And I will add this. Mr. Zuckerberg wasn't satisfied with suggesting. These grants require the funds to be expended as they dictate or in the sole discretion of the Center for Tech and Civic Life. They recapture all of those funds. You had a billionaire in the counting room and America was kicked out. Those funds funded the election workers. They funded the people who boarded up the windows in Michigan. They funded the election judges in Pennsylvania. And they funded your election designed by these cities contrary to your law. Thank you for the opportunity of speaking.
Very good. And our 20 minutes has expired, so we do not have time for additional questions. Our